I'd like to welcome Jody Maberry to the podcast here. We met a few weeks ago at a conference called The Thing. And The Thing is about whatever your thing is. And Jody shared a little bit from his expertise around podcasting. And I'm going to let him tell the stories, but he's got several podcasts going on. He's helped other people create very successful podcasts as well. And I learned a ton. He shared about how to be a good guest on a podcast, and now he gets to practice those things. So welcome, Jody. I look forward to hearing some stories. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing great, John, but I just realized during your introduction what I've set myself up for. You saw me speak about how to be a guest on podcasts, how to create magic as a guest, and now I have to see if I live up to what I spoke about on stage.
We look at it, you get to practice what you preach. So we're always practicing. Tell me, what are you up to right now? What's happening in your world these days?
Well, I am in the middle of a segment where I am just traveling like crazy, more than I typically do. It's just some wonderful opportunities come up. Just in the last few weeks, I've been to Buffalo. I've been to Orlando twice. Where else? I've been to Kuwait. I've just been all over the place because just wonderful opportunities are coming up. So that's a big thing going on. The 8th podcast that I started, I do that with Jeff Knoll. He's a former Disney guy. The podcast is called If Disney Ran Your Life, and we've done something a little different. The whole theme of the show is to think differently about everything, and we've done 22 episodes basically of practice where we published them, but we haven't told anybody that show's out there. Well, we're finally getting close to doing the public launch, the big launch, so episode 1 really will be episode 23. I've never quite done anything like that before, but that big launch is coming up. So there is a lot going on. I'm a busy man and a happy man.
Good. Now, on that new one, with who was it? Jeff Knoll? Or wait,
Jeff Knoll. Yes.
Jeff Knoll. Are you going to put all those practice podcasts up so that you have a big body to start with, or are you just going to start with 23?
So though the other podcasts are out there, all the episodes we've been doing are already there and they're up. But what we're going to do at some point is take all the old ones away.
Oh,
so. And I don't know when that is. So the whole thing is just an experiment, just doing things differently. So episode 23, which is episode 1, at some point that will be the first episode available. But for a while, all the past 22 episodes will be there too.
So for my vast listening audience of 2 or 3, describe what you do. How do you describe what you do?
Sometimes I change it depending on who the audience is, because I do a lot, and that's not always a good answer. People like to work with experts, so it's not a good thing to rattle off 10 things that you do. I'm doing that right now, but only to prove a point that you have to narrow down quite often when you're telling somebody what you do based on maybe where I'm speaking or the podcast I'm a guest on or whoever's in front of me. So at The Thing, John and I were together at The Thing. Well, I was there to speak about being guest on podcasts. So of course, when people ask me what I do, I really focus on the podcasting. But podcasting is just a portion of what I do. Yes, I host 8 podcasts. I coach people in podcasting. I've got a course coming up called Podcast Magic to help people get started in podcasting. But it is just a piece of what I do. I do a lot of marketing consulting. I do copywriting. I do some coaching. So it's a wide variety, but if anybody knows me for anything, it's probably podcasting. If you've ever heard the name Jody Maberry before, and it's been in a good conversation, then it's most likely been about podcasting.
So tell me tell me about your journey. I know you started off at a very different place. You started off as a financial analyst. How do you go from financial analyst to the go-to podcast guy?
Oh, there's so much in the middle. There's so
That's
much
what
in
I'm
the
hoping for.
So it went financial analyst to park ranger, and then not park ranger. There were some steps in between, but financial analyst. I sat at a desk every day, and I wore a shirt and a tie, and I thought I was doing what I thought I wanted to do. That's what I went to college for. But I would spend every day when I got off work, I would go hiking at a state park, and that's how I spent all my time. And I every chance I got, I was off camping or hiking or causing a ruckus in the woods somehow. And my wife and I just built a new house, and the couple that was helping us move in, she worked for parks but wasn't a park ranger, and she mentioned, "Hey, they're hiring park rangers. You should really think about that." And I did think about that, which changed everything. And I said, "I'm going to do this." Well, it took a while because I had to go back to school. I had a degree in finance, a degree in marketing, but in those degrees, you don't get very much credit in natural sciences. So I had to go back at school at night. So financial analyst by day, school at night, until I finally made it through the process. So it was a year-long process to get through that. I became a park ranger and did that for 8 years. And it's being a park ranger is as wonderful as you would think it is. Unless you don't like the outdoors, then I'm sure it's a miserable job. But I loved it. I loved being a park ranger. And I did that for 8 years. Like I said, when I left, I went back to school to get an MBA, and I worked for a luxury home builder doing marketing and other stuff for them. And I had this great opportunity with them where I could step away and not be their employee anymore, but still basically still be their marketing director. And that allowed me to start to do marketing for other people. In the meantime, I got the MBA, and I thought I learned some things I would love to contribute back to parks. But I didn't want to be a park ranger, and the government frowns on it if you show up in uniform like you're a ranger but you're not a government employee. So that wasn't an option. So I
And there's
started
rules against that, right? There's
there is. So I started a podcast, my first one, which was over 5 years ago, called the Park Leader Show. And it was about leadership in the fields of park and conservation. And that show it's still going, it's still out there. And that led to the next podcast, which was Creating Disney Magic with Lee Cockrell, who ran all of Disney World for a decade. And then that led to the next show and the next show. Now I've got 8 shows plus a couple that just we don't create anymore. And during that time, I've put out, I don't know, I should have counted before I came on. It's over 1,000 episodes, couple million downloads. I mean, hundreds of interviews. So that's how it came out. And you do that much, and if you pay attention and take notes, you learn a lot of things.
Yeah, you learn from your experiences going out there. I kind of have the flipped experience where I got a degree in biology and then a master's in how people learn and grow and development. I worked in camps up in the mountains of Southern California. Yes, there are mountains in Southern California. It snows there and everything. So I worked at camps, and I did some work on college campuses, but we did wilderness programs. Then I lived out of my truck and did outdoor programs, and was kind of a cross between Jacques Cousteau and Mr. Fun on a boat that did marine science and camping. And then I've had my own kind of consulting gig all throughout that time. But then I went internal and spent a decade at a large corporate university, showing up in the khakis and suit and tie every once in a while, but as few as limited as possible. And now just came back out, and I'm doing a lot more of the corporate business consulting around leadership, professional development, organizational development. So I spent my youth tromping around, and then came to the business world after that. So kind of we flipped the experience there a little bit between you and I.
Yeah, well, it's great. There's that. One of the things I struggled with in the beginning, when I started my own business, is I thought I have 8 years as a park ranger. What is that going to matter? John's not going to, well, I know you personally do care, but
Yeah.
John's not going to care that I was a park ranger. What does that have to do with business? And I used to downplay it. I used to never mention it. I didn't talk about it because I thought it would ruin my credibility. People wouldn't take me seriously. And I really upplayed having an MBA. And I've realized over time it should be the reverse. Nobody cares about that I have an MBA. I don't even care I have one. And everybody loves the park ranger stories. And so
Yeah.
I have found over time, and John got to see this when I was speaking, that I find actually in that presentation, I don't know if I used a park ranger story, but I find ways to take park ranger stories and tie business lessons into them, because those park ranger stories people really connect with. And then I can say, hey, and here's the lesson. So as a ranger, I was a law enforcement ranger, but every ranger does interpretation. And there's a 3-step formula to interpretation that I use when I'm on stage. I use for podcasts. I use quite often when I'm a guest on podcasts, even though I didn't prepare it this way for you, John. But the 3-step formula is: you tell a story, you tell why that story matters to the people listening, and then a call to action. And so I've just found that if you use that formula that I learned as a park ranger, then I can use park ranger stories to tie in business lessons. And all of a sudden, I became different than everybody, because how many other people do you know that do what we do, John, who's also been a park ranger? There's not many. I can't think of one. I'm sure there's others. I just don't know them.
Yeah. So when I was inside big corporate and presenting to executives and leaders and C-suite type people, they really didn't care that I've got a master's degree, and they would actually kind of push back if I got too academic on them. In fact, they would tend to use the word academic meant like not real world. But when I started telling the stories of some of my adventures, all of a sudden, and attaching them to the meaning or to the lesson I was trying to get across, all of a sudden, if they, after a coaching workshop, you would ask them, so what was the point of John's lion story? And, oh, well, it's not the lions that you see, it's the lions that you don't see or that are dangerous. And they attach that to triggers and things like that. So it's really, really powerful. The whole power of story gets, I think you've tapped into that. But before we go, I want to definitely get into the storytelling stuff. What drew you to the outdoors?
When I was younger, we used to do family vacations that were camping. So I just grew up camping a lot, often. That's how we spent our summers. So as I got older, I just started doing some of that on my own, which actually started with me and a friend canoeing. He had one of those huge aluminum Grumman canoes that weighed, I mean, they were huge. And we took that thing all over central Illinois. It was with Kevin Jury. We would canoe any water that could fit that canoe inside. Illinois River, Kickapoo Creek, didn't matter. We were taking that thing everywhere.
Now, if it's the type of canoe I'm thinking about, and I think Jody's talking about one of these canoes that can absolutely take a beating,
Oh,
and I mean, you could just beat them up, they get dinged out, and you're totally fine. Is that the type of canoe?
oh yeah. I'm pretty sure we could have been bombed in that canoe and been fine. They were amazing. So that led to us starting to expand our trips. We go canoeing in Missouri and Michigan and all these different places, and it just really got me curious about, I want to do more of this on my own. And then I started taking road trips out west. Always dreamed about going west, and then did some pretty amazing road trips after college. I lived in a tent for almost 3 months, just traveling the West. And it all came from being younger and camping a lot, getting exposed to it as a kid. And then that just led to, uh, I think I had always kind of wanted to be a park ranger as a boy. It's like a boyhood dream, but I didn't think that's not really going to happen. I just never really thought of pursuing it until I was already a financial analyst, and then found a way to just put the brakes on and turn around and go back to something I'd always wanted to do.
Yeah, for me, I grew up watching like Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom and Jacques Cousteau, and we didn't have the Nature Channel and Discovery until later on, but those were the people that I just loved. And I thought when I went to college, I thought I was going to be, well, originally I thought I was going to be an orthopedic surgeon because I'd been hurt so many times in sports. But it turns out that, you know, to be a doctor, you got to go through a lot of school, and I didn't like school very much. I kept biology because it meant that I could teach biology, and that's where you got to do all the cool stuff. And I got to do field biology and go out and like catch stuff. I've got a whole list of really cool things I've been bitten by. But it all of a sudden I got a chance to be that call them a naturalist, interpreter, and field biologist. But I got a chance to do that kind of stuff. And live that out. And there were a lot of transitions in there. I spent a year of my life living out of the back of my truck doing outdoor programs. And it was had a nice shell. So when it was really storming out, I could retreat in there. But most of the time it was either a tent or a tarp out in the middle of nowhere with a nomadic group of people who were all doing outdoor programs wherever the programs led us. So it was a cool life for a little while.
I bet. It sounds wonderful.
So tell me a little about this. I know that there was a transition from analyst to ranger, and then a transition away from ranger. What were those transitions like, and how did you handle those transitions?
Well, I view transitions a little different. I think I get itchy. So that was one of the good things about being a park ranger is you could change your park or get a promotion, or you could still be a park ranger and change things up. But I don't like getting too comfortable doing something, but transitions change when you have a family. So when I transitioned from financial analyst to park ranger, it was just me and my wife, and we didn't have kids. And that's a pretty easy transition. I mean, there's still a lot of more that comes with it when it's not just you, but when there's not kids involved, it's a much easier transition. But by the time I actually became a ranger and moved about 6.5 hours away from my wife, and then I would come home on the weekend. So did that for a year. And then by the time she finally moved to where I was living, we had a kid on the way. And then when I left parks, we had 2 kids. And so now it gets trickier because which actually led to part of why I left being a park ranger, because you have to think about, okay, long-term, what's more important, that I continue a job that was a dream job of mine, or that I get more time with kids and become deliberate about being a father and making sure all of this turns out okay. Because I wasn't seeing my family very much, working weekends, working nights, working holidays. Anytime you would want to recreate in a park, that's when park rangers need to be there.
That means that you can't be with your family at those times when, I spent in, whether it was camping or in the outdoors, all our camps were going on when, like we did Thanksgiving, we didn't do Christmas, but we did some stuff around Christmas and all summer long. Now, I did not have a wife or family when I was doing that kind of stuff, but I'm really glad to hear you talk about how those transitions change and how the desire to become a really good dad and husband kind of plays into what you're doing. Because you don't, in the entrepreneurial world, you don't have a lot of models out there of people who have strong belief in family. They might have a family, but it seems, at least the way that I hear it, much of the story and tactics and approaches kind of put family second.
Yeah, unfortunately, you get a lot of that. And I know I've passed up opportunity. I know I've passed up a lot of money because even though it was a good opportunity for Jody Maberry, the businessman, it wasn't a good opportunity for Jody Maberry, the family man. And there will come a time, there's going to be a day where my kids are out of the house and I can pursue some of that. But I don't, I have a very clear priority on what's more important. And that took me away from being a park ranger, even though that's a job I'd always wanted to do. It's taken me away from some other things. Now I realize I started off talking about how much I've been traveling, and that takes me away from my family. Of course it does, but
it's a season. It's not a life.
right.
Yeah.
That's right. And like, for example, last summer I was very deliberate. There were 3 months I wasn't traveling for business, period. This is just going to be a family summer, and we did that. Now this summer isn't the same. I've got some business travel I've got to do, but we're also spending time together in Florida. We're going to
Yeah.
Yellowstone National Park. We're finding a way to still make it work. And at the thing, John and I were both at the thing, and there were several speakers that talked about family. And I was so pleased to hear that. And that's actually how I started my presentation, talking about family, because when you go to conferences like the thing, usually they're just focused on how hard you got to work, how much you have to chase opportunities, don't get left out. You hear a lot of that, you feel a lot of that. And it's so easy to feel like, man, they're so far ahead of me. The other people, look at all they're doing, and I can't miss out anymore. Well, yeah, but I would rather miss out on whatever John's chasing than miss out on my family, because it's only around for so long.
Yeah, and that's like, I think one of the things that I've learned by coaching executives and also just working with managers and supervisors who believe in this myth of chasing, but they don't know what they're chasing because they have no personal purpose or why statement. They don't know what they're about. So any shiny object that seems like it's an opportunity, they chase after it. And they're like fish chasing a lure. They get hooked in and then they can't get off that whatever treadmill they're on. But if you know what you're about, and if you're about the podcast or you're about the entrepreneur, that's great because you know your purpose. But if you know that you're about your family primarily, you're going to be more successful across the board because you've already made tough choices that you don't have to think about in the moment. Where other people will agonize about, oh, look at this opportunity. It could bring so much money. It'll make these contacts. But if you've already made that choice of, you know what? No, I promised my kids, I promised my wife, I know that if I book another quarter's worth of travel, it'll put that in jeopardy. It's so much easier to make decisions, and the opportunities will come. Be ready for them. But if you know what you're about, you don't have to chase that lure. You know what I'm saying?
That's right. And that ties back into the question you asked about transitions. How did the transitions go? Well, if you understand what your priorities are, why you're making the transition, and who you want to focus on during transitions, they become easier. For me, it's been my family. And I probably if you ask them, they might wish I was around more or whatnot, but I have focused on them as I've made transitions, as I make decisions, and it's been a lot of fun. I work from home, so yes, I'm maybe gone one week a month, but when I'm here, I'm here, like fully here, always here.
Yeah.
It does balance out, because if I had a regular job, I mean, I would probably be gone more than the 1 week a month I'm gone anyway. So it's you just have to find how to make it work, understand what your priorities are. And if your priority is, hey, I'm going to take every opportunity that comes, then all right, do it. If your priority is your family, then keep that in mind when opportunities come.
Yeah, and it's seasons. It's knowing what season are you entering into so that you can be intentional about using that season to its fullest. You think about parks and you have different seasons where there's different usage, different volume of people going through. And if you are managing that location in such a way that people are able to take full advantage of whatever season is there. And the park can take advantage of whatever season is there too, for recovery, for production, for showing off too.
Yeah, that's right. And you understand as a park ranger that the Memorial Day to Labor Day, that's not the season to fix things. That's the season to serve park visitors, protect park visitors. In the winter, that's when you fix things, and you can show up in coveralls in the winter if you need to fix something. You don't show up in coveralls during the season of park visitors. And you're right, it's the same in your life. You just have to understand, okay, for right now, this is the season to do this, so I can do that later. And as long as you understand that and stick to it, because you can tell yourself, well, I'm only taking this assignment for a season. Yeah, but if you're not straightened out, then as soon as this one's over, maybe you get another project that you take
Right.
on that's even harder. So yeah, it is in seasons, and sometimes it's busier, sometimes it's slower, but if you're not mindful about it, you can find yourself always busy.
So speaking about, we just used an analogy of the seasons in a park and things like that. I want to dive into kind of how you leverage your experience in the outdoors and nature with business and leadership. What are your top 3 lessons that you've learned about business from the outdoors? Or excuse to tell your favorite stories.
Well, we can get into specific stories if you want, but one thing so let's go back to how I said I used to try to hide that I was not hide. I just didn't talk about being a park ranger because I didn't think it mattered. But then you go and you look at what did I do as a park ranger? Well, for one, this is a place, parks, if you take parks in general, this is a place where people come to get away from what they do. So we have doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, just people from all over come there. So you get the chance to interact with so many different people, but they could go somewhere else. They could go to Disney World. They could go to the mall. They could stay in a hotel. So what is it about parks that make people keep coming back? And then from one park to the next, every park has trees and trails. So how do you make them come back to your park? And how do with a lot of people, when they latch on to a park, they call it their park. I mean, they really take ownership of it. So as a ranger, if you're deliberate about figuring this stuff out, then it certainly does translate into business. And there's a lot of management involved because you've got to run a campground. You've got to lead people because you've got a team that's a mix of volunteers and paid people. And you've got people that show up from all over the place that have problems that I mean, there is so much. Plus there's interpretation. Plus for me, there was law enforcement. It's quite a mix. And I rose up through the ranks kind of fast. And I got to see some of the gaps in training. I got to see how just because you're good technically at something, which often leads to promotion, that doesn't mean you're good at managing or leading.
There's a story that I got from the automotive industry in sales. What happens on a car lot is they take their best salesperson, turn them into management, and they lose twice. They lose their best salesperson and they've got a crappy manager because it is totally different skill set.
Yeah.
What you're talking about.
Yeah. And so there's just a lesson one that just shows there is so much that is relevant from the park world into the business world. And I don't think I came into my own as an entrepreneur until I accepted that and embraced it and then started mining for it. I would take some of my favorite park ranger stories and say, okay, how does this fit? What lesson can come from this? And then I would take the interpretation model I told you about, tell a story, tell why it matters, call to action. Well, I've got the stories. Now, why does it matter? And what call to action can I use? So once I embraced that, and which to go along with your question, interpretation, there's another thing that's relevant into the business world. Now, that seems radical in some ways because the interpretation model is used in parks and zoos and museums and aquariums, but not in the business world. We don't interpret things. This isn't a place for interpretation, but it really is. It really is. So there's another example of how parks is relevant, and I've pulled from something from the parks world into business. And it gives me a way, when I take park stories, it gives me a way to connect people to something, because they enjoy the park ranger stories, and then they can say, this does matter to me, and they remember the story. And then that has really helped. And I had a leadership position where I managed people, and of course that translates into business. And then you look at other ways. I mean, there's stories I've been saving, I just have never found the right opportunity. Like, I don't know how to finish it. So an example on that, I've never talked about this because I just haven't found the right way, but I mentioned I was a law enforcement ranger, which meant as a law enforcement officer, you have the legal authority to take someone's rights away from them, or to use force, or whatever you need to do. But I always thought if it got to that point, something went wrong. And so I know there's a good story, a good lesson in there, where it's more, as a ranger, you did it right if you were able to use influence and words to get someone to do something rather than force, because I could legally and physically force you to do whatever I wanted in a situation. But if we got there, it went bad.
Can I give you a direction on this? Because it's something that I work with a lot, which is helping leaders understand the different types of power that you have. And most often what people would call leadership is a forceful direction. And it's exactly what you're talking about. They'll exert their positional power to force people into conformity. Mm-hmm. And if you need to do that, it means that you're spending your bank account that you have on engagement, goodwill, enthusiasm of your people. If you can make it, instead of external locus of control, law enforcement ranger forcing you into compliance, you turn it into internal locus of control, the employee wanting to do something, then that's success, where you don't have to exert direction. You don't have to exert that positional power, where they're stepping onto the trail because they want to. They're not running off the trail and breaking the rules because they can. You've just given them direction. You've given them purpose without having to pull out the cuffs. Does that make sense?
It does. I like it. I like it. We used to get training as park rangers in what they called tactical communications, which was all about using communication as a tactic instead of a force, using communication as a way to get people to do something that you want them to do. I used to like to call it tung fu, but
Nice.
it is along those lines. Can you use communication as a tactic to gain compliance when you may be fully justified in going hands-on with somebody, but it's safer for everybody if you can get there through communication?
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And we would try and train our leaders to think in terms of how it's the same kind of thing. We'd call it emotional jujitsu, where you use their negative energy and you flip it around, and all of a sudden they're complying without even knowing that they're complying. So I love those types of stories. We would help leaders, whether they were in the wilderness or not, or outdoor stuff like that. Part of what my job was helping them find stories. And we had a whole process. Instead of starting with the story, start with your point, and then you brainstorm all the possible, like, think of your childhood, think of your family, think of your experiences, your hobbies, and you just list things that might possibly connect with that point. You find the best 2 or 3, and you try to develop 2 or 3 of them, and one of them will sort out to be the story that will get you to your point. I spent a lot of time, like I said, at camps, and when you learn storytelling at a campfire, it's all about entertainment.
That's right.
But when you're trying to teach and lead people through storytelling, you've got to start with your point, not with the entertainment value. As a matter of fact, sometimes the entertainment value may be too entertaining that they miss your point. Now, in your world, I'm really curious about what role does storytelling now play with your life and your business?
Well, I enjoy telling stories, so I do it as much as I can, probably more than I should sometimes, just because I love telling stories. It's fun. I got to do it as a park ranger, which I just enjoyed that. So how do you take something that you enjoy so much and find a way to make it apply? Well, John saw me on stage, and I used storytelling as much as I could, and I in that presentation, and that's usually my format, because I don't want to just get up and tell someone information, because it'll just roll right off in
Well,
most cases.
and even in the way you presented. So when he was presenting, it was a narrative of before, during, and after. So he laid out his points as a narrative. And even though there were tactical pieces in each of those things, it was a story about somebody getting ready to go on a podcast, being on the podcast, and then what happens after you're done. So it's even if you're being informational, you can still do it in a narrative way. And that's one of the things I saw in Jody that kind of said, hey, you know what? I want to talk with this guy some more, to dive into that storytelling part. Now, like you said, you love telling stories and you use it a lot in what you do. Why are stories so powerful?
Well, I think that it helps us connect to something. Quite often we won't remember details, but we'll remember a story. So if you can use a story to teach a lesson, then it helps people connect to it. So let's use my presentation at the thing as an example. I could have given you all the same information without telling a story. And there were little stories inserted throughout, and it was wrapped into one bigger story that started at the beginning of my presentation and then didn't finish until after all of the information had gone through. So it just helps keep people engaged. I've been told, I don't know the science behind this sort of thing, but I've been told that when you tell stories, that it activates in your brain as if it's really happening to you.
Yes.
So if I can get on stage and tell you a story that activates different parts of your brain, well, for one, you're going to enjoy it more. Two, you're going to connect with me. And three, because new parts of your brain have been activated, you just might remember what I talked about.
Yeah, and there's a saying in brain science that data convinces, but emotions move people to action. And that's what you do when you're storytelling. What you're doing is connecting to people's emotions, and you're evoking a feeling in them, whether it's laughter, sympathy, excitement, fear, whatever it is. You're evoking some sort of emotion, which moves people to action. So that when you get to your call to action, people are ready to go. You've got, you should always make sure that the facts align with your story, because there's people who can use story to manipulate you. And that's the ethical piece of this, is knowing that you're telling a good story for a good reason to move people to right action. But it's really, really powerful when you can tell a story that really connects with people.
Yeah, and that for me goes back to the park ranger stories. People love them, and I don't think in a conference like the thing or these other conferences that I've been able to speak at, there's not many park rangers there, and most people there haven't met a park ranger in real life. So it just goes over well. People like the park ranger stories, and people have a iconic image of park rangers. Most people love park rangers. And so it just all goes well. And another reason I like to tell stories, presentations, is nothing makes me happier to be on stage and make people laugh. And usually when I'm just giving someone tactical how-tos, nobody laughs. And if they do, I've done something wrong.
Right.
So I love it. I just love making people laugh too. So I try.
Tell me this: what story do you think you've gotten your best response from? I want you to tell kind of what's your best story that you get the crowd reaction with.
There's one particular outhouse story that I get a good reaction. I didn't tell it there. I actually at the thing. So that was a new presentation that I had done. I'd put it together just for that conference. So that was material I had never taught on before, which meant I needed new stories. And I just didn't have a park ranger story that fit the way the stories I used fit. But there's an outhouse story that gets a good response. I also have what I call a flagship joke, which is a joke that is it's funny but plain enough where I can insert it in any situation. So if I ever need a joke on the fly, I've got a flagship joke that
you got to tell me the joke, and you got to tell me the outhouse story.
Okay, so the flagship joke. What do you give a cannibal that's late for dinner? The cold shoulder.
But you need the portable drum rim shot.
Yeah. So I call it the flagship joke because I know I can use it in any situation. It's not offensive to anybody unless you're a cannibal, and then I don't care if I offend you, probably. So
nobody else does either. So you can offend. Yeah. Cannibal, safe to offend. Short list of people that you can't offend.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So the outhouse story comes from when I had just switched from one park to another park, and I'm getting accustomed to this place, and I'm driving around. I'd been there maybe a week, and I noticed that outhouse door was propped open, which we didn't do that at the other park I was at. I assumed we didn't do that at this park. Figured, well, someone had just propped it open because it stunk, and they left it that way. So I park my truck and I walk up there to close the door, and I find a man in the outhouse with this big stick down the hole. You know what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
And I said, "Hey, park ranger, what's going on here?" And he said, "Oh man, I'm sorry. I dropped my jacket down the hole." And I said, "Look, you don't want that jacket. We pump this thing out once a year, twice in a busy year. That jacket's going to be so nasty. You do not want it." And he said, "Oh no, I know. I don't want the jacket, but there's a sandwich in the pocket." So that story usually connects with people, but they a lot of people ask about wildlife stories. I have a squirrel story. It's a bit longer. So now
go for it.
Well,
Dude, can you do a shortened version of it?
I can tell you what happened without the sometimes story
just as a story.
I can tell you the story without the show. I'll do that. But the very short factual version of what happened is a squirrel bit a park visitor, and it was pretty bad bite, all bloody, and so we had, when we responded, the squirrel came back, and then. And again, I'm cutting out a lot of details, but the squirrel, I was wearing shorts because even in uniform, you could wear shorts. So I was wearing shorts, and the squirrel, no kidding, jumped onto my leg and clawed its way up my leg into my shorts. And I knocked it out. And the ending of the story is I ended up beating the squirrel to death with my baton. And justified. Oh, yeah. Yes.
That reminds me of a story when I was working at a camp. I was on the accommodations team. So we're setting up the lake for a big event, and we see something swimming out in the lake. And this is a man-made lake. There's no fish in it. There's no wildlife in it. So we knew it wasn't supposed to be there. So I go out and I wait out there I was in my work clothes. So I wait out there with a traffic cone. It's a bat.
Oh my.
Bat swimming across the lake. So I pick it up with the cone, and I forget, I think I brought it back down to our office, and they got rid of it. But nobody knew, like, I was off then after that. I left. And so the leadership didn't know what happened, and they thought that the bat was rabid. They didn't know whether I touched it or not, or there was any fleas or anything like that. I got word that they were concerned if I was exposed to rabies. So the next day I go into work, and before I walk in the room, I pop a couple of Alka-Seltzer in my mouth and take a guzzle of water and walk into the room and say, "Hi, folks." Foam flying out everywhere. "I heard you wanted to see me." So that was my fake rabies story.
Oh, that's good. I don't have a rabies story as a park ranger, so I like that one.
Yeah, I'm sure that you probably didn't you have like warnings or anything like that? Because at the different parks where I frequented, every once in a while there'd be a report of somebody rabid squirrel, rabid rat, something like that. So they had to just put warnings out there. But
Well, in Washington State, where I live, the only animal with rabies is bats.
really,
Actually, yeah, no squirrels, no raccoons. It's yeah,
lucky you.
but the people like the wildlife stories, but the most dangerous thing, the most unpredictable thing you ever ran into as a park ranger was people.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wildlife was
Yeah.
cool, but people.
Especially like as I was a guide and expert and all that kind of stuff. But the most trouble we ever got in was when we didn't have any clients and it was just a group of guides doing stupid things. We put ourselves in more danger. We were out at Catalina Island and there were no guests or clients around. So we all get into, like 6 of us get into a boat that's going to go to the only place where there's a city, Avalon. And we go have a great time. On the way back, the motor cuts out and we're going against the current. Nobody thought to check and see if there was any oars or paddles in the boat. There wasn't. So we're floating. Finally we get somebody's attention. They throw us a line. They drag us back over to our dock. Well, the dock has been put up for the night. So we can barely, the way that we got out of the boat was I was hugging onto one of the pilings and still trying to keep the boat close to the dock. And somebody climbed up on my shoulders and then somebody climbed up them to get up and lower the dock so we can get in. And whether it was that or some climbing stories, the most dangerous things that we ever did was because we stopped being experts and just were stupid. Luckily, there were injuries, but nothing serious. And and when I started to manage guides and leaders like that, man, I was all over them for never forget your expertise, even when you're off duty.
Yeah. That's good. There's none that I'm at liberty to share, but there are park ranger stories about goofing off as well.
Off duty. Yep.
Yes. Always.
Hey, well, I don't want to I would love to continue this conversation all night long, especially if we were around a campfire with a couple of beverages. I'm sure we could just go back and forth. But I want to end with just a couple of quick questions. First one, what author do you find yourself quoting most? Or author, songwriter, poet, anybody, who do you tend to go to for a quote?
Well, I am originally from Illinois, Peoria, Illinois, and Hannibal, Missouri is not far away. So if you may already know where I'm going with that, but Mark Twain, I just absolutely love the Midwestern wit and humor and wisdom of Mark Twain. So I quote Mark Twain often, and Theodore Roosevelt, who he should have just been an honorary park ranger.
Yeah.
The guy is incredible. So I quote him a lot. By the way, off topic, one president has been a park ranger. Do you know who that was?
I don't. Who was it?
Gerald Ford. Yes. So there's probably the two biggest for me. And Mark Twain came to mind first, but I probably quote Theodore Roosevelt more often than Mark Twain.
I just finished doing a recording, doing a podcast on Mark Twain, a quote that I use a ton when I'm presenting around. Have you heard about I'll tell it real quick here. So he was traveling around the world doing another one of his retirement tours because he lost another fortune. And that he was married to a Baptist Sunday school teacher, and yet he smoked, he drank, he cussed. They said like at his peak, he was smoking 100 cigars a day. Now that's a stretch goal. I mean, for anybody. So he's getting ready to go on stage. He's had a few drinks and he's famous for his wit, but also being able to string together some good curse words. And it embarrassed his wife to no end that he would cuss like that. So he's trying to put on his bow tie, the ones you really have to tie, not a clip on. She saw that he was getting frustrated. And so she wanted to show him just how embarrassing it was when he cursed like that. So she saw him getting frustrated, and she steps up and says, "You blank, 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 you blankety blank, blank, blank." And he kind of shakes his head, nods, smiles, and says, "Honey, you got the words, but you sure ain't got the music." And it actually goes into what a lot of what I'm about is words and music. Out in our world today, there's a lot of people who have the words and they sell the words, and that tends to be what sells. But what works is when the words and music work together. when there's the real heart and passion along with the theory and the language and the model. Those two things together are what impact the world. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is because you've got a great message around how to podcast, but you've also got the heart behind it, which I call the models and the content is the words, but you've got the heart behind it, which is the music.
Oh, well, thank you. That, first of all, that's a great story. I had not heard that Mark Twain story.
I can't find it anywhere for sure, but it's been passed along to me as happening at a theater in San Francisco. I just can't cite it yet.
Well, it's wonderful. And so thank you for the story, and thank you for the kind words about me. I appreciate that. So I get so much joy out of being able to help people. And in particular with podcasting is to see people get their message out. And quite often the people I work with, I have the privilege to get to work with a lot of executives, and these people have so much knowledge. They just need somebody to help get it out of them. And I get to help with that. Man, it's so fun. It's so wonderful because I know their message is changing the life of so many people, and I get to help get it out. And even just helping people launch shows or learn how to podcast, I know that's a voice. Those are words that are coming out that wouldn't otherwise. So it's so good. It's great when you get to do something that you feel really contributes and you get paid for it. That's when you combine those two, it's a good life.
Let me ask you this. If people that, you people out there want to really learn about the heart or music of Jody Maberry, what should they tune into? What should they listen to? Where should they go?
Well, I would check out the Jody Maberry Show, the cleverly titled Jody Maberry Show, because
creativity for that one. That was.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's actually a story behind why I named it that, which I know it's obvious it's named after myself, but I do a lot of work for some big name people. And I thought, well, I don't want to just always be in other people's shadow. So naming it after myself was to say, look, I'm not just someone else's right hand. I'm Jody Maberry, and I'm good enough to have my own show. So that was the reasoning behind it, not just to name it after myself. So, but I would start there, the Jody Maberry Show. I share a lot. I tell a lot of stories, especially park ranger stories.
I just listened to your interview with Paul Klein. That was really good too.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah, he's wonderful. Yeah, he spoke at the thing where John and I met, and he's wonderful. And I don't do a whole lot of interviews on that show, but here's one fun thing that I do when I have somebody that I know will contribute a lot, and I have them on the show, which again doesn't happen often. The very next episode, they ask me 3 questions, and so that's a fun way to do it. And it's always about whatever. I don't prompt them. It's just whatever's on their mind. So that's a fun thing to do. So start with the Jody Maberry Show. You can find nearly everything else I do at jodymaberry.com. If you just enjoy me that much, which hopefully you do, you can find me on a lot of podcasts because I've got 8 of them going. And only 2 I would say are mine, the Park Leaders Show and the Jody Maberry Show. The rest I work with other people, but you can find me on all the social channels as Jody Maberry, except Instagram. I'm Sugar J Mayberry on Instagram. Had to add a little flavor there. And I would love to hear from you. I'd love to connect. If you're interested in podcasting, well, I can have some things I can send you to help you out.
Well, you've got a course that's coming out.
That's right. I do Podcast Magic, which is everything so here's why I am creating Podcast Magic, because I can't help everybody that wanted my help for a couple of reasons. 1, I don't have the time, and 2, not everybody can afford to work with me one-on-one. So I thought, well, I'll just take everything that I would, if John came to me and said, help me launch this podcast, everything I would tell John, I'm just putting in this course. And so you can take everything that I've learned and do it on your own now. So that's what's
it's all the core insights without the customization.
That's right. That's right. And there's actually two more pieces coming, two additional courses that will build off of that. But if you go to my website, jodymaberry.com, you can find a download there. That's what's that one called? I forget. It's about podcasting. Something
Go to
about
the website and figure out which one he's talking about.
There you go. Or you can go to Creating Podcast Magic, and then you can get the Podcast Magic download, which even if you don't take the course, this will walk you through getting started. I put this together, the document, just to help you start. If you don't know where to begin, this will do it.
Well, Jody, thank you so much for sharing so much with me and taking the time to do this. I've had a blast with this discussion. Can't wait to hear more of your ranger stories and maybe get into some of the wildlife stories and things like that. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, John. You are wonderful.